tell you guys, here's how this happened. So if you know me well enough, you know there's stories behind everything, and I'm sorry, gentlemen. Months ago, my wife comes home with a book in her hand, and she says, if I wasn't married to you, this is the guy I would want to be married to. And I remember thinking, I am so looking forward to see who number 2 is. And so I took the book and I said, where can I trash this at? I said, great. And so literally 3 days later, I'm flying back from New York, Ambassador Young, and I look up and there's Chairman Bryant standing right there. And I said, did my wife plan this? Like, is this where like I'm being replaced? And so there he was. And so then we actually called her on the phone, and that went well. And I look back at that night. It was a midnight flight, and I think to myself, what a night, man. And I remember asking you on the spot, could we do this? And you said yes, and I thought, he's gonna forget. There's no way this is gonna take place. And you didn't forget. So thank you so much for both of you being here. It is such an honor to have you both here. It's all in the numbers.
So the date is August 26th.
The date is August 26th.
No, the date that me and your wife are getting married is August 26th.
August 26th. I was like January we had this, but August 26th is the anniversary.
No,
okay.
My wife said it was okay.
There's a reason why she's not here today. She is actually working for Must Ministries today, helping kids who are displaced get back into school. So August 26th, I won't be there. So it's all in the numbers here.
Neither will I.
And neither will you. And I was going through both of your stats. And I'll start with you, Ambassador Young, obviously. Is there anything that you don't do? And I got to use my glasses on this one here, if you don't mind. Pastor, civil rights leader, you were close confidant with MLK Jr., U.S. Congressman, first Black United States Ambassador to the United Nations, the 55th mayor of one of the greatest cities ever in our country, Atlanta. And you haven't stopped, by the way.
130 honorary doctorate degrees. Brought the Olympics to Atlanta, Georgia, was responsible for getting the key votes, mostly from Africa, that allowed for the Olympic Committee to assign this, to get Atlanta in the running so that they could go, I believe it was Japan, and get the vote to bring home for the Olympics. As a result of the Olympics coming here, Atlanta had the opportunity to become an international city. Andrew Young then triggered about $70 billion of foreign investment into the city by investors from around the world who trusted him. He helped to build on the legacy of Maynard Jackson and others to create the largest, what is now the largest airport in the world, which is Atlanta Hartsfield, and is now the only international city in the South, Atlanta, Georgia. I call it the moral capital of America as well, but it's the only international city in the South. $400 billion a year in annual revenue, which makes Atlanta the 10th largest city in America by GDP, by economic activity. And it's the only city that has had a mayor mentored by Dr. King, the only city that's had a black man or a leader who happens to be black in the world to build a top 10 economy built on diversity and inclusion and fairness, compassion, dignity, and fair play in the world.
It's amazing.
Him.
It really is.
But you have to put that in the context of how we started. And I think that we were blessed with the historically black colleges right after the Civil War. So we were turning out really good teachers. When I came to Atlanta, most of the public school teachers had master's degrees because it was probably the best job a woman could get, maybe the only job a woman could get. And we had some of the best public schools. When I was mayor, I remember we sent 7 students to MIT on scholarship from Atlanta public schools, Benjamin Mays and Frederick Douglass. We had 14 scholarships that were offered us by Notre Dame. And so our students could go almost anywhere in the world. and be respected.
It's amazing.
But that was 100 years of work since the Civil War.
The second Reconstruction.
The foundation of Atlanta, in fact, in 1943, Mayor Hartsfield, who had a great vision for what the city should be, got voted out. And he got voted out because he bought some land for the Atlanta airport and paid $90,000 for that land out there. He invited Delta, which was well, it really was made in a crop duster airline from Louisiana. He invited them to come here, and he gave them the land that they needed for a headquarters for $1 a year for 50 years. Then he did the unforgivable sin. And I think the unforgivable sin that voted him out of office was not all that, but he put red lights up on Peachtree Street.
And they voted him out.
And when they put red lights up on Peachtree Street, out he went.
That is the unthinkable sin, by the way. No, I'm joking, but yeah.
But keep in mind.
But traffic has always been one of the main contentions of the city from the beginning. But what it did, there was a young woman by the name of, drawing a blank now, who was head of the Urban League. And she took Ivan Allen, who was to be the mayor following up Hartsfield. And she took him out to Atlanta University, the Atlanta University complex. And in the 40s and 50s, that Atlanta had more black PhDs than any city in the world, than any state in the world, see? And more than most countries. And they formed a coalition between the white business community and the black college community. And no mayor, I mean, 30 years later, I was the first mayor to ever win with a majority of the white vote.
Which is impressive, and I gotta ask, sorry.
It was Mayor Hartsfield and Mayor Ivan Allen and Mayor Sam Massell all got a majority of the black vote, but a minority of the white vote. That's the way I got elected too, and Maynard Jackson. But in my second term, well, I really shouldn't brag because I didn't have much opposition, but I got 85% of the vote.
Wow.
And it was the first time that the white community majority joined the existing majority between the business community and the black community, black intellectuals. And that's, when you stop to think, that's a pretty good foundation for building a city.
It is. When you look back at your time in history, and I'm going to get to you, Chairman Bryant, here in a few minutes here.
No, obsess on him. Let's support us.
Let's go back a little bit here to the March on Washington. This year actually marks the 60th anniversary of it. Can you take us back to what that day was like?
No, I can take you back before that day, though.
Okay.
Because there had been talk about a March on Washington in World War II with A. Philip Randolph and the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters over black employment and the desegregation of armed forces. It didn't happen. And in 1961, we had over 60 bombings of black people's homes in Birmingham, Alabama. One place. It didn't get to the papers in Atlanta. and it was like black people coming back from the military and going under the GI Bill and building nice little frame homes. There was nothing, they weren't mansions, they were just little wooden houses with a picket fence, but they had azaleas and roses. They were trying to live like folk. And for some reason or other, that enraged the Klan mentality in Birmingham. And they were bombing people's houses, and it wasn't getting any attention. Fred Shuttlesworth Church was bombed 3 times. And the 3rd time he came over to see us it was December 17th, 1962. And he said to Dr. King, we can't sit back with a passive nonviolence. We believe in nonviolence, but we've got to somehow make it more aggressive. And they wrote up a list of all of their complaints, the Birmingham Manifesto. And we decided then, SCLC, that we would join them in 1963 and start a movement. Well, it was an election, and we put off for the election, but Dr. King said to me something. He said, Andy, you know any white folks in Birmingham? And I said, I really don't think so. And he said, well, you got a couple of months to get to know some. And,
couple of months?
Yeah, well, that was January, December, January, and we didn't really start demonstrations till almost March. Wow. But I go into this because we had 2 months to prepare the community. And the black community wrote the Birmingham Manifesto. Without us, without our help, it was the things that they thought were wrong and unjust about this city. I happened to have gone to a church conference in Michigan, and there was a delegation from Alabama, from the Episcopal Church. And so I picked up the phone and called the Episcopal Diocese house and asked them, did they remember me and this? And I said, that turned out the director of Christian education remembered being there. And I asked her, would she introduce me to her bishop? And I'd like to try to set up a meeting between him and Martin Luther King and Ralph Abernathy and Fred Shuttlesworth and the people. I said, we're going to have problems here. And I think, I'm a pastor, and I think the church is going to be needed in helping to keep it calm, to keep it peaceful, and to allow nonviolence to work. So I say that to say that nonviolence was never just what black people did. And they set up a meeting. We explained that there would be a boycott, and that for 90 days, black people would not buy anything but food or medicine, and that would hurt the economy. But we said, that's because we can't spend money where we can't work. We can't spend money where we can't go to a restroom. We can't spend money where there's a sign saying black water and white water. And we can't support a city where we're not allowed to vote.
Yeah. By the way, that's as much economic as it is pure democracy, because what he's talking about is we're not going to support, we're not going to spend, we're not going to invest. So the March on Washington was also the March for Jobs and Freedom. So it was economic in nature. And just to put a through line with what he's saying, so he mentioned A. Philip Randolph. Well, A. Philip Randolph, who doesn't get enough credit, thank you for mentioning Ambassador Young, he told the president, unless you integrate the military with blacks, we're going to march on Washington. The reason he never heard about it was he integrated the military. That's where black professionals came from. Black doctors, black lawyers, black engineers came from A. Philip Randolph doing that. 20 years later, here comes Andrew Young and Dr. King. And what he's not going to tell you, because he's too humble, he in addition to him helping Dr. King to edit that speech, by the way.
No.
That he gave. Go ahead.
No, I didn't have a thing to do with that speech.
Not true. Go ahead.
But before that speech, Dr. King was put in jail. And when he was put in jail, he wrote the letter from the Birmingham jail. And he wrote it around the margins of the New York Times. He didn't have any paper. And he didn't have a dictionary. He just barely had a pencil and a newspaper. When he ran out of space in the newspaper, he wrote on toilet paper. And he smuggled it out of the jail. And we got it, and it spread all over the world. I think the Quakers started promoting it because they believed in nonviolence also. Now, when we settled Birmingham, everybody was what we call freedom high. And Fred Shuttlesworth and James Bevel they didn't want to stop. And they wanted to march to Washington. When they said march to Washington, they meant getting out on Highway 11 and heading toward Washington. See? And they were patenting it after Gandhi's Salt March to the Sea. And A. Philip Randolph sent Bayard Rustin down to talk to us because he said this would be a right time for a march on Washington. And so we got together, and to hold people back from marching from Birmingham to Washington without plans, we turned it over to Bayard Rustin and A. Philip Randolph. And it was magnificent.
Yeah.
And we had no idea how many people were coming.
You had no idea.
No.
And you weren't in the suite of the Willard Hotel helping Dr. King with that speech the night before?
Not at all. No, I was out on the street trying to make sure that things were arranged right. And I say that because there was a group working on a speech, but the speech that they worked on, nobody was paying any attention to. It was a good economic speech. It said that America had presented the Negro with a bad check, and that when we came to the Bank of Freedom and Justice, we were rejected, and our checks were stamped insufficient funds. And he said, I refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice in America is bankrupt. Mahalia Jackson was sitting there, and she said to him, tell him about the dream, Martin.
Wow.
And she had heard him speak about this dream, I have a dream, in Detroit back in June. This was August. But when he shifted gears and said, I have a dream, he captured the hearts not only of black people, but of white people and of people all over the world, that we all somehow believe that earth can be more heavenly.
Yeah. Do you remember where you were when you heard that speech that day, like where you were standing?
Yeah, I was back in the crowd.
What
I
did it
wasn't
do
up
to you
on
personally?
Huh?
When you heard it, what did it do to you personally?
Well, I'd kind of heard it before.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was all over. Now, remember now, Martin Luther King was still just, he wasn't 30 years old.
Yeah.
He wasn't 30 years old. Well, he was about in his late 30s.
Yeah.
No, he was 25 in Montgomery in 55.
Same difference, mid-30s.
But
There's something that's irritating about Ambassador Young, and he'll give you this impression he had nothing to do with anything. I want you to Google search or whatever search engine you use. I want you to search Dr. King, Andrew Young, and in every photo, you'll see Dr. King on mission, and where's Andrew Young looking? For the threat.
Wow.
He's looking here, he's looking here, he's looking here, he's trying to help. He's never looking in the camera. On any of the pictures. He never wanted to be Dr. King. This is really important. Everybody else around him thought they could be as good as Dr. King, as smart as Dr. King. Maybe they thought they were better than Dr. King. It was animosities, whatever. Andrew Young just wanted to be himself. He just wanted to be helpful. So he was there and invisible. But in every picture, again, then do your own research, you see Andrew Young is just trying to help his friend, trying to protect his friend. So he's right when he says he's in the crowd, but he was in the crowd intentionally. And that's why he was the most respected, most important aide to Dr. King, because he was the guy that could be trusted under any and all circumstances. Don't let him tell you a word about he didn't have anything to do with that speech, or he wasn't in the room, and all that kind of stuff. It's just not true.
No, I was not in the room.
Okay, whatever. And you should talk to him ask him about whether they wanted Dr. King to speak.
Well, they see, this was before the kind of mass media we have now.
Yeah.
And you had to speak, start at 12 o'clock. They figured the press would only cover it till 1 o'clock. And so everybody was trying to get up first. And Martin was not pushy, but he didn't get up until it was a little after 6 o'clock. So they figured all the press would be gone.
They didn't want him up. He put him last, and they figured nobody would be paying any attention. They didn't want him to speak at all.
Wow.
I can't.
Is it Dr. Dorothy Height?
Well, no. It was that I need to figure out his age. He was born in 1929. This is 1963.
Wow. So
You all do that math.
34. Is it?
Yeah, okay. I'm saying that he was still a kid compared to Roy Wilkins, who was in his 50s. Whitney Young was late. Whitney Young was 50 also.
He was born in 29.
Yeah, all of us were new guys on the block, and we had figured out that there were people like James Bevel, James Orange, J.T. Johnson. Nobody ever heard their names. They came out of the movement with students, and they came, C.T. Vivian.
Yeah.
Jim Lawson had been to India as a missionary with the Methodist Church, but he's also been in jail for not wanting to go to the military, being a conscientious objector. So it was a national bond. I was actually working with the National Council of Churches in New York when the Nashville sit-in story came.
34 years old.
National Council of Churches had I was running a movie, film, Sunday morning television program, and the Nashville sit-in story came on. And my wife said, it's time for us to go home. I said, well, we just bought this house. We are home.
Yeah.
See? And she said, no, my home will never be New York.
This is Queens, yeah.
See? And she said, I'm going home. Well, she had 3 children, And
And when they say they are going home,
well, she
yeah.
meant Marion, Alabama.
yeah.
And she said, I'm going to stay with my mama, and you better find a job down south somewhere. And I said, what about this house? She said, sell it. I said, I got a good job. I can stay there forever. She said, but you stay by yourself. She said, I'm going back. And it worked out that my church, my denomination, United Church of Christ, got a grant from the Marshall Field Foundation on teaching people to register to vote, to read and write in order to be able to register to vote and to get jobs.
This is the most important story he's going to tell you.
So that we trained over 6,000 people from Charleston, South Carolina. It started with Mrs. Septima Clark, who was fired from the public schools of Charleston. And she then, on her own, started riding the ferry from Johns Island to Charleston, and it was an hour ferry ride. And she taught them reading lessons to the longshoremen, going in the morning and coming back at night, see, in order to get them registered to vote. And we got some money to fund her, and they said, well, we need to move it to Atlanta. And they put me in the grant so that I could come with her.
Aren't you being kind in this story? I mean, didn't you go to Atlanta before that and you sort of were sent packing?
No,
Shuttlesworth?
no. I mean, I didn't want anything, forgive me, but I didn't want to get caught in church politics.
That's right.
I understand that.
Before the March on Washington, Martin Luther King had been expelled from the National Baptist Convention. See, for being too militant.
For being too popular.
Well, they said militant.
Wow.
But it split the convention. And I didn't want to be in church politics.
Yeah.
And so by having a separate fund of money from a foundation that was non-religious, I was able to partner with Mrs. Clark and Dorothy Cotton, and we trained 6,000 voter registration workers between East Texas and Charleston.
I love watching you two before we go any further. And so, because this is how we got here, by the way, because you said to me that night, this was your mentor.
It's my personal hero.
It's your personal hero. Yeah. And I want to introduce you, if you don't mind, a little bit here, Chairman Bryant, if I can just pause you for a minute. Chairman Bryant, he said I can call him John, but I'm going to call him Chairman Bryant here. It goes to the numbers, and we have it on the screen here. Man, you've done some incredible things, if you don't mind me bragging on you for a minute. I'm going to put back on my glasses here. I got to say this. You help set people free. I should be very clear on that. Financially, the numbers are on the screen. 5% of black business owners have gone through your program in this country. 10% now. Okay, my research is wrong. Sorry about that.
Those numbers just went up.
Keep it going.
Numbers just went up. Let me keep going on here, if that's okay, Chairman Bryant. You served on President Obama's council, as long as former President Bush as well. You own, now this number may be wrong, help me out here, 700 homes. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. I want to go on further here. You are the founder of Operation Hope, the chairman, CEO of Operation Hope, the CEO of Bryant Group Ventures, and also the CEO of the Promise of Homes Company. Did I get all your day jobs right there, sir? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Give or take one or two?
Yeah.
Impressive, man. If I could stand and clap for you, I would for both of you. In fact.
I'm his valet, actually.
You're his valet.
I tell you what, the movement was about redeeming the soul of America from the triple evils of racism, war, and poverty. Poverty is about green. I mean, people are poor. I mean, people are not hungry because they don't have food. And they don't have food because they don't have money. So to survive in this free market system or capitalistic system, you've got to have access to capital, and you've got to understand how money works. And the reason I was impressed with him was that he started out there. Now, he doesn't like me to tell this, but I think it's important to it's important to how he got so cheeky and so confident and almost arrogant. See? But the reason is he didn't get to go to one of these highfalutin Ivy League schools. See? He was a soul-trained dancer with Don Cornelius on Soul Trail. And I contend, and he can dance, see, that to have a different move to make every time you're going down the Soul Train line, and to change that move every day, you develop a tremendous amount of ego strength. And you got to survive against the brothers and sisters that you're dancing with every day. And so, I mean, it's part of what makes him as creative as he is. Because there isn't anybody thinking about what he's thinking about.
Wow.
See, how did he get those thoughts? Because the Soul Train dancers were in the streets when the Los Angeles rioted over Rodney King. And the Rodney King riots burned down half of Compton and LA.
Wow.
And he and his friends conceived of the idea that we're not going to get anybody to ever rebuild this community.
Yeah.
We can't bring a banker down here, he'd be scared to come. So he came up with the idea of having a banker's bus tour. So I don't know how many bankers they had or how many buses they had, but it was more than one. And he got all these bankers. You can't get one banker, but you can get 50. See, and so he got 50 bankers on a bus. How many?
No, I'm saying what you just said was very true. We started with one bus, we ended up with 10, but yeah.
See, and he brought them all into the
hood,
the ghetto, the hood, and showed them what was on this corner and that got burned down and what was on that corner. And with 50 bankers in the bus, they started saying, well, maybe he and I can get together and we'll take this corner. And they refunded the redevelopment of Watts. Now, that didn't happen in Washington after Dr. King's death. Washington still hasn't recovered from the assassination of Martin Luther King.
Right.
Los Angeles did because of they called it Operation Hope, Hope for the city. After a riot. And so nobody else was talking about that. See, nobody else was talking about economic development in the neighborhoods. When I was talking about economic development, I was talking about attracting big money I was building from the top down.
Gotcha.
He was developing from the bottom up.
When you hear him talk about you like this, what do you think?
that makes me extremely uncomfortable. So, but you can't stop him, and I wouldn't dare. But I just want to go back and set the record straight about him.
Okay.
Because I don't think he gets nearly the credit that he deserves. This is one of your founding fathers.
Right. Yeah.
You had a first set, Jefferson, George Washington, the first Secretary of the Treasury. You had a first set of founding fathers. And by extension, I'll add Abraham Lincoln to that, even though it was a different era. And then you had a second set, second Reconstruction. Dr. King, Andrew Young. These weren't black leaders. These were American leaders who happened to be black. Because no one was coming to a country that was segregated. And this is a country about immigrants. Now, the reason that I want to set this record straight is I'm not making an emotional story. I'm saying when he got that contract from his church to come down here, it gave him his own salary. So when he first came down to Atlanta, he was nicely sent back. Everybody's got a seat. We're cool. Dr. King's, they called him Martin. Martin's always bringing somebody down here, inviting them. We cool. Everybody's got we good. Bye. Yeah. And so he came back with a contract from his church that paid his salary, which meant nobody could fire him.
Wow.
But it was the same salary that it was no more than everybody else was getting.
It's irrelevant.
Well, yeah.
It's irrelevant. The point is
no, it was very relevant because it was just $6,000 a year.
Now, I didn't interrupt you about me. Okay. Can you not interrupt me about you? Okay. So I will get in that word in edgewise about you. So the point here is really important that Dr. King spent all his time on the road. Well, possession is 9/10 of the law. So if you in the office, you possess the office. You in charge. And so they were able to tell him, go away. Well, this time they couldn't tell him to go away because once Dr. King knew he had his own salary, there's a seat right over there. So the only person who couldn't get fired for saying something that everybody didn't like was him.
Well, except that we did the same thing with Hosea Williams in the Presbyterian Church. C.T. Vivian was paid by the Baptist Church. I mean, it turned out to be a good way to involve the churches in the movement.
That's nice, but
officially.
You're the only one that Dr. King expected to give him the straight scoop and expected to knock heads with the staff.
That too was an accident because I got there and he was not there. He was still in Montgomery. And his secretary said to me, you know, the one thing we can't find is somebody to help Dr. King answer his mail. Would you mind taking over the answering of the mail? And she gave me an egg crate full of letters.
That's a lot of mail.
And I was in the YMCA, Butler Street YMCA. That was where I had a room. My wife was still in Alabama. And so every night I would answer 100 letters or so. And she would type them up, and then he would sign them. And after a while, he said, how does he know what I want to say? See?
How did you know?
Well, because I knew him. I went to the same kind of seminary he went to. See, I read the same Bible. And I think the same Holy Spirit got to me too.
Yeah.
And his wife, and Dr. King's wife and his wife from the same little town, by the way.
And went to the same high school.
Wow.
Well, great Andrew Young quote, coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. Is another great Andrew Young quote. To live in a system of free enterprise and not to understand the rules of free enterprise must be the very definition of slavery. So when Dr.
I thought you said that.
No, you said that. So when Andrew Young, I think this is a really important point because it ties it all together. When Dr. King wanted to get the straight scoop, he came to Andrew Young and asked him, Andy, what do you think? Because he knew that Ambassador Young would give it to him straight and no chaser right down the middle. And the only time Dr. King ever got upset with him was the one time he threw his hands up and said, let these crazy guys do what they like. And he said, no, this is your job. This is your job. So he extended that role when they went to a march in the South. And once they marched and shut down the economy in that little town, the majority of which were black, in 6 weeks' time, Dr. King would say, Andy, now it's time for you to put a suit on. Take these overalls off, put a suit on, quietly and behind closed door, do not embarrass anybody, as we normally do. Go meet with 100 business leaders in town and cut a deal. Get the whites only signs down. So it was Dr. King setting it up, shutting down the economy, dignified, nicely, respectfully, using basically the Uber of that time, which was underground, what they call black taxis, that were literally people using their own cars to drive people around so they weren't on the buses because they couldn't sit in front of the bus. And then after that, the private sector was feeling so much pain and so much heat. They would meet with Andrew Young And Andrew Young would cut a deal with him to take the whites only signs down from their businesses. It was the businesses that integrated the South, not the government.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was him.
Yeah, no, 100 businessmen in Birmingham agreed to desegregate Birmingham a year before the Congress acted.
Wow.
And they didn't care what George Wallace thought. See, they didn't care about, they cared about the money.
Yeah. Color was green.
See?
Then and now.
And so,
Is the president calling you?
no.
Or your wife? You should like the president. I got to tell a story quickly about his first wife. Carolyn is a doll. His wife, his current wife. But when he got married to Jean Charles Young, he had become a UN ambassador at some point later on, and they were doing a parade for him in the little town that she grew up in. I guess it was Marion. And so Jean, they're on the parade route, and Jean looks over and says, "Andy." She called him Andy. I called him Ambassador Young. "Andy, look at that guy. He's a bum now. I went to school with him. I dated him in school." And Ambassador Young said, "Well, you know, you could have married him." And she said, without missing a beat, "Yeah, Andy, if I married him, he'd be the UN ambassador of the United States of America."
I got to ask this question with you two. What has this relationship meant for the both of you here? Because I've watched you guys, and I watched you earlier. I wish everyone could be in the room earlier. I mean, you literally got on the ground to hear from him. And watching you here on stage has been fun. What has this mentor-mentee relationship done for the two of you?
Changed my life. I mean,
Well, the thing that changed his life was a suggestion that I made because he was not welcomed in Los Angeles.
this is true.
And a lot of my friends in politics in Los Angeles didn't like him
Wow.
because they didn't understand he was doing something completely different.
They thought I was going to run for office.
See?
For their office.
For their office.
Yeah. and I said, you know,
I had no interest.
you really need to move your headquarters from Los Angeles to Atlanta.
Do you remember the quote you gave me? Mm-mm. It's biblical.
What?
Prophet with.
A prophet is not without honor except in his own hometown.
And he said that, to make me feel better, he said, you know, Dr. King was disrespected by his friends in Atlanta. Called Marty, called ML, called everything but Dr. King. Staff had to call him Dr. King to give him some respect. You know, he was 5'7", 160 pounds. I mean, he was, and people called him, they wanted to call him, people, by the way, and Dr. King got stuff done all around the country. You don't hear about stuff he got done in Atlanta, right? Yeah. So yeah, I had a similar problem, obviously much less vaulted. I had a similar problem in LA, and he said, so the mayor, the then mayor, I won't mention the mayor's name, Villaraigosa, had invited, wanted me to get Ambassador Young to come meet with him. So he couldn't get Ambassador Young to come meet with him, but he wanted me to come. I said, fine. So I called Ambassador Young, he agreed to come out and meet with him. So the guy made me sit on the floor, very much like I was sitting over there. Yeah. The mayor made me sit on the floor. It was coincidentally no seat for me. It's fine, I didn't mind. I have no self-esteem problem about stuff like that. And so Ambassador Young noticed it. And I just figured I needed to exercise to stretch, so I just sat on the floor. So we're at the airport later, and Andrew Young said, you know that he's messing with you. The mayor's messing with you. Like, he thinks you want his job.
Wow.
And he said, you gotta get out of this town. Like, they're gonna pay you no respect whatsoever. They're gonna do everything to stop you. They think you want the little raggedy job. And so come to Atlanta, where we actually respect what you do.
And you took his advice.
Went and bought a house.
We had a film on the other night, last Sunday.
It came on Sunday, yeah. Channel 2,
The Color of Money. And it was on WSB, I think.
Yep.
And the thing about it that impressed me was
It's his film.
I made the film, but because I saw him setting up an office in the Trust Company Bank in Mississippi, and there was a black woman sitting in that office, and she was counseling two white people who had just lost their jobs at Nike in Tennessee. She had been with Nike in Tennessee also, but when she lost her job, Operation Hope helped her get her credit scores in line, find a way to get a new job, get a new house. I mean, just get in the financial flow of a free enterprise democracy. And here she was helping two young white people who were in the same problem that she was in.
Organization.
See?
It really is.
But that was symbolic of what we were trying to do, because we were never trying to put white people down. We were trying to lift white people and black people up.
That's right.
And we reached out, see, to people in the mountains of Tennessee when we went to March on Washington with the Poor People's Campaign. And so this has always been about ending poverty. And we put less emphasis, if you end poverty, you have a better chance of ending racism. Because poverty produces envy and resentments.
It does. It really
And
does.
Well,
I want to answer your question. He answered for me. But I want to answer your question about what he's done for me. He taught me humility.
he hadn't learned yet, though. He's in process.
He taught me how to laugh. I say, go right, ignore it. He taught me how to laugh at myself. Man, I was serious. I mean, I had something to prove. I had something to prove. I mean, I grew up in the hood, D-A-H-O-D, the hood. I was homeless 6 months of my life. I was so poor I couldn't afford an O-R. I was just PO, P-O. I mean, I had something to prove. I had a chip on my shoulder, and I was very serious. It was like so many times Ambassador Young would just stop me, like, knock it off, like, just relax. And so I figured if he could be light in how he walked and how he talked and how he rolled. I mean, this is a legend in the world. He just completely chilled. And he just taught me to take life seriously, but not myself. And everything was going to be okay. The game would come to you. You didn't have to go to it.
But you also had a lot of work with, what's the AME preacher's name that was your friend?
Reverend Cecil Chip Murray. Yeah.
Reverend Murray
Yeah.
understood that the power of God works in and through you in spite of yourself.
Yeah.
And so I didn't have to introduce him to Jesus, and I didn't have to help him to, he already had
The foundation
he already had some of the foundation. And his mother is a saint.
Juanita Smith, my mom, yeah. So I'm going to give you another example.
And his wife.
Yeah, Shatra.
He's surrounded by wonderful people, so he's going to be all right.
So on to serious topics. So there was another very important moment when Bash Young was talking about the way I speak, and I used to read speeches, and he said, "Not put that stuff down." He said, "Look, part of you's trying to sound like Dr. King. You don't." Right? He's out there. I knew Dr. King. I was granddaddy. You don't sound anything like him. Put that thing down and just talk. Just talk. And I said, well, I'm gonna miss something. He said, nobody will know what they missed. Just talk, right? And that was one of it was the smartest things I ever did. Let me finish. So I did. He made me forget where I was. So I did that, and then he looked at me one day. He said, now that you're doing that, understand this. You can't go in the pulpit and preach like me and Dr. King, but we can't go in that corporate business suite and meet with that CEO of Truist Bank or whoever and cut the deal that you cut. Wow. It's a different talent. So understand your talent and your gift. So people confuse confidence with cockiness.
Yeah.
You cannot go in that corporate suite unless you have quiet confidence. But we're just not so used to seeing it. Everything we do is loud.
It is.
You can't be loud in that suite. You got to be cool, smooth, but you better be confident.
Wow.
Or they will eat you alive because capitalism is a gladiator sport.
Wow.
So if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. I mean, that's just the way capitalism works.
Yeah.
So I had to learn a different talent, a different skill, and even though he wasn't a capitalist, he understood the capitalist system, he understood leadership. He understand he's one of the greatest leaders ever to live. And the gifts and the lessons he has to provide are timeless. And that I really learned how to flow. I had the intellect, but I didn't know how to make it flow, and he helped to make it flow. Okay, now say whatever you like.
Well, I was going to say where I got that from was when I went to my little country church down in Beachton, Georgia. They told me, they said, now, preacher, we know you done been up north to school and all, but you can't come down here and put no paper in the pulpit. He said, we don't want, if you have paper in the pulpit, this will be an empty church in 3 Sundays, if that long. He said, we want you to come down here and bring us a message from your heart.
Wow.
And if you can't speak from the heart, we ain't gonna listen to you.
Wow.
See? And so it's surprising, but it worked in Thomasville and Beachton, Georgia, but it also worked at the UN. The UN, that's what got me in trouble at the UN. They'd send me these long, dull speeches, and I'd print them out and pass them out to all of the delegates, and then I'd say, now this is what we're trying to say. And then I'd go ahead and speak about what's in the paper. And I wouldn't miss much, but they'd listen. Yeah. Nobody listened when you're reading a paper.
Wow.
And that's all I was telling him, that he didn't need to have a paper in his hand.
That's right.
He just flowed.
Let it come from your heart.
That's right.
You guys have both stayed longer than what you agreed to, so thank you. This is my last question for both of you here. We're in some hard times. At least I think we are.
I don't think we are.
You don't think so? So
No.
we will get through this.
No, not only will we get through this, but the news thrives on bad news.
Yeah.
And so we're worried about our problems, but we don't see the progress that is constantly being made. And I'm not talking about Washington. We're talking about inflation, but I can't afford most of the restaurants out here in Buckhead.
That you created, because without you, there'd be no 400 freeway.
Yeah.
You know that? You built the 400.
By the way.
Yeah.
But
Thank you.
if I've never been in a restaurant in Buckhead or College Park when it wasn't half filled with black folk, close to half. And I know I can't afford this. These people are making good money, or they're putting it on their expense accounts. I don't know how they're doing it.
What they're doing it.
But we're a $400 billion economy in Atlanta. Atlanta's economy, and he looked this up for me,
10,000.
but it's comparable to the economy of Norway.
That's right.
So I mean, we're equal to a nation. Mm-hmm. There's no nation in Africa that has the budget and the economy, gross national product, that Atlanta has. Mm-hmm. I mean, from Gwinnett down to Clayton County, and this is the metropolitan area. See? Our airport generated $66 billion a couple of years ago. It's larger than the airport in Beijing. It's larger than Heathrow and Gatwick together in London. It's larger than Paris. And
it's busier than Beijing.
It's run by citizens of the city of Atlanta that are educated in our institutions.
Yeah.
And it's run well.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's a great city.
Can I answer that question?
And there's no taxpayer money in that airport. See, we didn't go to the taxpayers. There's no taxpayer money in the Brave Stadium. I mean, not the Brave Stadium, the Truist Park. No, I mean Mercedes-Benz Park, because we went to Wall Street and we set up the airport so that it generates enough wealth to pay off the bonds that we borrowed to create it. And every mayor we've had has borrowed at least $500 million from Wall Street. But we don't go to the city council. We don't make taxpayers pay for it. See? We do that with a lot in this city. We have been blessed, and we found ways to pass on those blessings. But we forget, and I say this because I look around and we are in the Second Baptist Church on Ponce de Leon. Yeah. And we wouldn't be here without the churches. See? I remember when Dr. King, and I was with him when he first met Billy Graham. And Billy Graham came up to him and said, Dr. King, I want to congratulate you on your very powerful prophetic ministry. We wouldn't be where we are without you. And he said, and Dr. Graham, without your equally powerful pastoral ministry, we wouldn't have been able to make the progress we've made. Wow. So there's the church militant and the pastoral community. Yeah. And we're all in one phase or another, but you give God the glory.
So here's another Andrew Young leadership lesson. Talk without being offensive. Listen without being defensive. And always leave even your adversary with their dignity. Because if you don't, they'll spend the rest of their life trying to make you miserable. It becomes personal. Step over mess, not in it. You want to have win-win, not win-lose. Some so-called civil rights leaders today who want themselves to win and others to lose are actually creating a situation where there is no win. So he really just gave, what he's really talking about really is what is biblical. A house divided cannot stand. We have got to find a way to live together. And that's another thing he taught me. The reason that he answered the question, I believe the way he just answered you about the times, is because he was on the balcony when Dr. King was assassinated. Yeah. I mean, you're asking a guy who stood next to arguably the best prophetic, the prophet of the 20th century, as a bullet. Wow. Stopped his life and ripped off his vocal cord. I mean, it was his spinal cord. 8 inches from him. So from that to when he was beat up in St. Augustine by 200 Klansmen, and that then triggered the Civil Rights Bill, the Voting Rights Act, I think it was in '64, 4 days later, from when he was beat up in St. Augustine. You're asking a guy who's gone through all this mess, are we going to be okay? I think his answer is, yeah, we're going to be okay. Let me give you my context. Yeah. And I'll try to do it quickly.
Can I interrupt you?
You're going to anyway.
Well, because when we went through it was like marching through the valley of the shadow of death and fearing no evil. And I remember one of the Klansmen said, them so-and-so got some nerve. And one of the old ladies in the march, and it was mostly old ladies and children, said, son, it ain't nerve, it's faith. And then when Dr. King went to the restaurant where they put him in jail and refused to serve him, and after the Civil Rights Bill was passed, he went back, and the lady who refused to serve him welcomed him, but she got nervous pouring a cup of coffee for breakfast, and it overflowed into the coffee cup saucer, and she said, just a minute, let me get you another cup. And he said, no, Thou anointed my head with oil till my coffee cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy will come to me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Last question for you, Chairman Bryant. I've enjoyed studying you. I just got to be honest about that. I really have. How do you do it, man? I mean, I wish I had a better way to ask this question, but how does your schedule do it? How do you do it personally? How do you make it happen? Fair question?
I guess. I mean, I don't think about it. I just do it. I mean, it's hard to hit a moving target. I just keep moving. And I don't let the perfect become the death of the good. I don't.
Say that slowly again.
I don't let the perfect become the death of the good. A lot of people I know, because they went to too many schools and stayed too long, got too many degrees, and they've got the perfection syndrome. And they want it all to be perfect. The analysis has to be perfect. The setup has to be perfect. The structure. Well, by the time you finish with that, the situation's changed.
Yeah.
There is no perfect.
Yeah.
So just get out. It's like I mean, if you look at your iPhone 14 today and look back at your iPhone 4, you'll laugh. But when you had your iPhone 4, it was just fine. And so I get up every day with whatever software upgrade available to me, and I work that until either it gives in and gives me what I want, or I punch through to another software level because I'm constantly reassessing, reimagining, and hustling because you grow through compounding. You know, you build wealth, you make money during the day, you build wealth in your sleep, it's compounding. Well, your brain also compounds. So I'm constantly trying to figure out how to be better, while at the same time doing whatever I can right now to make people better. So PhDs are good, PhDs are better. I think it's more important to go do something than to think about something. It's more important to do something okay today than to think about something perfect later. Because there's somebody struggling right now who just needs whatever help you can provide. And so we've always had an obsession on action. We've had a preference on action. And I think that the action and the moment has finally come together. The question, I think this dovetails to the question that you asked earlier, which I didn't get a chance to answer, which is this moment we're in right now. I think it's a Noah's Ark moment. I think that 2020 to 2030 is a third Reconstruction. I think what he did was a second Reconstruction. I think what Lincoln and Frederick Douglass did was a first Reconstruction. First one was about freedom, second one was about access, this one's about opportunity for all.
Noah's Ark moment.
A Noah's Ark moment. That if you didn't have the worst pandemic to hit the world since the Spanish flu, COVID, which had never happened in America in 2020, you would not have had a disruption in the political system because Americans vote their pocketbook. We had a good economy in 2019, and the person who was president would have won re-election by an overwhelming majority, and we'd all be living in a different world right now. But because of the pandemic, I think that God simply said, look, hey, I give y'all free will. I let you do as you like. Most of the times, y'all do okay. You screw it up just slightly. But you guys are at a tipping point right now. You're a light on the hill. You're still the beacon for the free world. I really need for you guys to have the right spirit. And I think that we had a Noah's Ark moment because that moment, that COVID changed the entire political environment. It got everybody re-engaged because people were not voting. If you think about this, people weren't voting in the prior elections. People were disconnected. Then you had within 6 months of that, you had George Floyd, and the only reason you had George Floyd is because you had people who were black and white, rich and poor, conservative and liberal, young and old, at home because of COVID, watching TV, watching the news at the same time. What's the chances of this? And we all said the same thing. That's wrong. It was a public lynching. No one disagreed with what they saw. It's unbelievable. So that then triggered a 400-year-old social justice reckoning on Black America, which then triggered $62 billion invested by the private sector in the renewal of Black America, or on an economic mechanism to get them from the streets to the suites. And then you had a reckoning with a reset of our democracy because there was an attack on our capital that hadn't been seen since the British did it. All this happened in a year. What's the chances of this? It all happened in a year.
Yeah.
I'm at a dinner in Sun Valley with a bunch of my rich friends, and I know whenever I get invited to a dinner, it's some rich people's houses, they really want is a free speech. They don't want to pay me. They want me to come and have a $10 meal and not pay me $40,000 for a speech. It's fine. I'll sit there and I'll wait for the cue. Please, John, you say a few words. I'm sitting there and it never comes. They never ask me to speak. Because the wealthy white lady, and I say wealthy white lady on purpose, on the right, start going off about Roe versus Wade. And then when she had a couple drinks and her girlfriend had a couple drinks, she started going off about Roe versus Wade. Then this other dude who's wealthy starts going over about the environment. And then some other dude started going off about some issue that he didn't like. And after about 45 minutes, I raised my hand. I said, excuse me, you guys do realize what's going on here. No, what? You all now know what it's like to be black. Because none of what you say matters. No one's listening.
Wow.
And so maybe you're now angry. You're frustrated. Maybe you're going to do something. Rainbows only follow storms. You cannot have a rainbow without a storm first. You can't grow except through legitimate suffering. So because they now had a problem that was important to them, maybe they were going to get busy trying to solve it. We all have now something. We're all frustrated about, angry about, upset about, disappointed about, and everybody is now engaged in the reimagination of America.
Wow.
Which is good.
Which is good.
Mm-hmm. Thank you both. Thank you, particularly. I appreciate it. Thank you, Ambassador Young.
Thank you.